The biggest issue, immediate issue, is money. The donors have stopped giving money. It's almost completely ground down to a halt.
I'm going to say what a lot of these folks aren't saying. I'm just going to say it. If you think that there is consensus among the people who want Joe Biden to leave, that they will support Vice President Harris, you would be mistaken. I'm going to say that because if they're going to come out and say all their little things on background off the record, but they're not going to be fully honest, I'm going to be honest for them. I'm in these rooms.
AOC, in a 50-minute live late Thursday night, laid out exactly why it is so irresponsible to call for Biden to step aside without really talking about the consequences.
What I will say is what upsets me is people saying we will lose. My community does not have the luxury of accepting loss in July of an election year. Like, my people are the first ones deported. They're the first ones put in Rikers. They're the first ones whose families are killed by war. And this is horrific. I'm not here to say everything is amazing, okay? I'm not here to say that to lie to people. What I am here to say is that we need to make decisions in the conditions that we have before us.
And one of the key consequences she talked about was the fact that if Democrats tried to change the ballots and put somebody else's name in the president or the VP slots, that this is going to have legal consequences. Each of the 50 states that we have their own specific rules about when a ballot can be changed, when a ballot will be printed, how to change the name of the ballots. And she said that she asked a very specific question to the lawyers in the room, the power brokers, she says. She says she's not getting a call from voters or constituents asking Biden to step aside. She's saying it's this class of people that are essentially power brokers. They're the donors. They are elected officials who maybe are more beholden to their donors. They are lobbyists. They are the power brokers. This is what she's saying. She's asking these people in this room, and specifically to the lawyers, what is your plan? What is your plan for what we know will be a GOP contested issue of every single state's ballot if you were to change the name of the ticket? And I think that that is not being talked about enough.
Mike Johnson came out and said that they're absolutely preparing legal challenges to wherever it's possible. And I want to tell you, those legal challenges are most viable where? In the same handful of swing seats that are needed to win the presidency. I'm here to tell you that a huge amount of the donor class and a huge amount of these elites and a huge amount of these folks in these rooms that I see that are pushing for President Biden to not be the nominee also are not interested in seeing the vice president being the nominee. Will they win out on that? I don't know. But I am here to tell you, do not take that for granted. Do not take that outcome for granted. And I have said, game out your actual plan for me. Game it out. Have you looked in, what are the risks of this going to the Supreme Court? What are these things, right? And I'm not here to assert any major thing. If y'all want to come with the receipts in the comments, that's fine. But what I can tell you is that I have stood up in rooms of folks making these decisions, and I have raised these questions, and no one had an answer for
these conversations that we're hearing in the media about calling for Biden to step aside act as if it would happen in this magical vacuum without consequences.
Like I said, the only one who makes this decision is President Biden. He has communicated he is in this race. He is going to see it through, and he's ready for a second term. And until and unless that changes, I'll
But
go ahead.
You think that there's a possibility he could change his mind?
I don't. I have heard nothing to the contrary. I understand that there are people with different opinions. I understand that some are playing fantasy football and want to just pick a couple of random leaders that they like across the country and design a ticket. That's just not how this works. We have a president who's gotten the nomination, who's earned it, who is barreling toward convention. And unless he decides something differently, this is the field and this is the high stakes we're in.
So let's break down the consequences. We know the Supreme Court, especially this term, has made really radical decisions, such as giving Trump and any future president absolute immunity for their Article 2 official conduct and a presumption for their unofficial conduct. What will they do if there are contested ballots in swing states? Can we count on them to be impartial, to be fair? Or are we going to see Bush v. Gore all over again, where they stopped the count in Florida and gave the election to Bush? And I'm here to tell you, I was a voter protection legal volunteer in the 2020 election. Now, 2020 election had quite a bit of legal contested issues as well, because it was the first time a lot of states had mail-in ballots. So the GOP was contesting all the new state legislative laws regarding mail-in ballots and the procedure around mail-in ballots. It was like a minefield. And it is what gave ammunition, let's say, to Trump's argument that the election was unfair, because the election was done in a way that some people didn't recognize. Wasn't always mail-in ballots in certain states. And so it was easy to feed into that fear that mail-in ballots could be fraudulent. There was, even though it wasn't, it was easy to build on that.
What do you say to that female independent suburban voter who feels that way, to win her back?
First of all, I won in 2020 by a lot, okay? Let's get that straight. I won in 2020.
You know that this,
and if you look at all of the tapes, if you look at everything that you want to look at, you take a look at all of the stuffed ballots, you take a look at all of the things, including things like the 51 intelligence agents.
There were recounts in all of the swing states. There was not significant widespread fraud.
The Democrats had a team of lawyers, such as myself, be willing to volunteer and help protect the voters, because also voters in a lot of states didn't understand the law about mail-in ballots. And so I was helping in North Carolina, and there were lawsuits even before November regarding the mail-in ballot procedures there. This was happening in every state. Nevada was a big place that they sent lawyers after November because it was a contested state, and there were a bunch of lawsuits there about the mail-in ballots. So if you think that we can just switch the ticket and put somebody else's name on the ticket, and that is not going to be fodder for a gazillion lawsuits by the GOP and feed into yet another narrative that this is not a fair election, that this wasn't done by the rules. I'm here to tell you otherwise. And I think that the fact that AOC pointed that out and the fact that more people aren't talking about it is really shocking, because whether or not that's the right decision to make, we need to be talking about that consequence, because there's the image of it. In one respect, if the state ballots, let's say, are contested, there are also a mechanism that the electors in that state could vote how they want to vote. So you could say that maybe the electors, let's say Arizona is a contested state, and the change of the ballot means that the courts rule that it gets thrown out. But the electors are allowed to vote how they want, and so they vote according to the popular vote, even if it was technically thrown out. That may be legitimate under the Electoral College rules, but are we really going to go walking down that path to depend on the Electoral Colleges and electoral certificate? This starts to feel undemocratic. Even if it is legally valid, it starts to feed into that narrative of an election not being democratic. And then you have the very real legal consequences, where you may end up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decides the election. And with this Supreme Court, that is a very dangerous consequence, that media that is talking nonstop about this idea of Biden stepping down is not talking about at all. And any elected official who isn't coming out and talking about the consequences, the legal consequences, at the same time as they're talking about Biden stepping down, is doing such a disservice to all of us who voted for Biden in the primary. And if you're asking for the vote of our vote to be basically replaced by the delegates in the convention, you should also be giving us the facts of what the downside is, instead of acting as if there's only upside. And in terms of the convention, I'm a delegate to the California party, and we vote to decide who we want to, we just did a vote to decide who we wanted to endorse for the Senate race. And it was Katie Porter and Adam Schiff and Barbara Lee. And no one candidate got enough votes. Although Barbara Lee got the most votes under the delegates, nobody got enough to be able to get the endorsement. So if you have that happen again at this convention, you're most likely going to have to take multiple votes. That's going to take a long time. Michigan, you have to finalize their ballot 2 days after the DNC is done. That is so close to, Ohio may just be gone, because Ohio, you have to have it well in advance, right? I think August 7th is their deadline. Ohio hasn't gone Democrat in a while. So Democrats might be willing to let go of Ohio. But Michigan, you cannot let go of. And that deadline is so close to that DNC being 2 days after the convention. The risk of all of those thousands of delegates not deciding it within the deadline is a real risk, because also according to AOC, the power brokers that be don't want Kamala Harris. So there does not seem like there's going to be some consensus to Kamala Harris, which would be probably the easiest in terms of the ballot. And if there was some sort of consensus, and easiest in terms of a vote. But instead, you're going to have all of these different delegates voting among many different candidates. It is going to be very difficult to come to a consensus. And why aren't we talking about this? Why are we acting as if replacing Biden is some magical solution? And Bernie Sanders was out there yet again supporting Biden.
So he has a record to run on. But equally important, Stephen, he has recently, as you may know, come out with what he calls a 100-day agenda. If reelected, what he will do with the Democratic House and Senate in the first 100 days. And the ideas that he is talking about, I think, will resonate with the middle class and working class of this country.
And AOC says this too. She says the voters aren't the ones who don't want Biden. It's the donors. It's this power brokers. Don't diminish what he has to offer. And it's true. If we just talk about the contrast in the agenda, Biden wants to expand Medicare, include vision and dental. Project 2025 wants to reduce Medicaid, 18.5 million Americans being dropped from Medicaid. Why are we not talking about that? And instead putting this narrative without any transparency about what the consequences are.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.